Hello, welcome to episode number 29 of the Brew from the Bothy podcast. My name is Fay. Thank you so much for joining me. Lovely to have you with me for this. Hopefully you have brew in hand. It is so cold here and it is blowing a hoolie that I am back on hot juice. I've got a hot water bottle shoved up my jumper and I've gone back to putting shawls on because it's freezing. We had snow and hailstones last week. I think a lot of the UK did, but it's unsavoury. This needs to stop. I would quite like the hot weather back, please. Spring is ready to go. The clocks went forward on Sunday night, but the weather just hasn't really got with the programme, and I would like that to change quite rapidly, if you don't mind. Thank you very much. Hopefully you are all well and you've had a really good 2 weeks. I've got loads of little bits for you today. There's a lot going on and lots of little bits I want to update you on, so let's crack on. And I'm going to start with what I'm wearing, because this is one of my oldest knitted makes. Many of you that have been around knitting for a long time will probably recognise this shawl. It's usually a little bit more colourful, but that's not me. It is called Leftie. It's by a German designer called Martina Behm, who's also known as Strickmig on Instagram and on Ravelry. And 10-11 years ago, Martina Behm's shawls were all the rage. There was a Hitchhiker, there was Mrs. Watson, there are loads of them, and Leftie is the one that I was always drawn to. It's meant to be a little scrap buster, and let me show you why. Because you can literally just, for all of these little stripes with the leaves at the end, you can do a different colour. But obviously, me being me, I didn't. I just wanted something a little more grounded and neutral. I think the yarn that I used, it's so squishy and lovely, is Rowan soft felted tweed, which is still available, but I think it's probably a different iteration from what it was when I made this with it. Honestly, it's so squishy. I think the shawl is meant to be with a 4-ply, but me being me, I also didn't use a 4-ply. I think the soft tweed is a DK, so mine's a lot squishier, and it's a garter stitch shawl as well, so it's just like a big old hug of a shawl. And this is probably my most used shawl. I wear it a lot. It goes under jackets, and I've worn it consistently for 10 years as well, so it really is a bit of a favourite. And because I like a little matchy, back in the day when I made this, I also made myself a little hat out of the scraps, because cuteness when you match things up. I love it. This is so out of shape now and big because it has been so well worn and it's been soaked and up mountains and generally used everywhere. Maybe I need to try and felt it down a little bit. But lovely soft yarn, and I just felt the need to put it on today because it's just so cold. Right, let me go and make this look nice again and I'll be back. This is the other reason I like wearing this shawl, because it sits nicely. Not every shawl sits nicely. Not every shawl sits nicely, but this one, partly because of the fabric and the density because of the garter stitch, when you put it on it and you get it positioned, it just sits there and doesn't shift. So it's a really nice one to wear and wear well. Right, apologies if you can hear my heating clicking. There's nothing I can do about that because I'm not willing to freeze. I love you, but I'm not going to sit here recording a podcast being cold, so you might hear some clicking going. Right, let's dig in to what is on my hooks. I really thought this is going to be off my hooks today, but the yarn that I'm using has an extra 10 grams in it, so the overall skein was 110 grams, and that's just going to take too long to do the other 10 grams, and I don't want scrap yarn left at the end of it. But by tonight I will be finished my Omni shawl. I love it. The drape, I told you about this last time and I said that the drape on it would be fantastic, and it really is. It needs a bit of a block, but it's just so nice. The linen and the silk in it makes it really quite nice and silky, smooth. Who knew? With silk in it, it would be silky smooth. But sometimes that's not the case when you mix it with other fibres. But the blend is just really nice to work with. It was a little bit rougher in some places than others, where you got maybe a little bit more of the linen content, but I didn't find that to be problematic. It's not anything that would stop me ever using this yarn again. And it took the stitches, the crochet stitches, really nicely. Let me see if I can just give you a little close up there without it blowing out. There we go. So I've used herringbone half trebles for this, and up at the lace section here it's actually trebles and chains to make the filet. And as I was making this, I was wondering about if there are any lessons that I learned about doing filet crochet, although it's limited filet, and I've got a couple that I can pass on for you, whether it's filet or whether it's a stitch where you are making chains and then you will be working back into those chains at a later point on the next row or round. You can just work into the chain spaces. So for every filet block that I'm created in this shawl, there's a treble, 2 chains, and then another treble, because that stitch height to the 2 chains gives you something that is the best representation of a square, which means that I have got 2 chains to work into with my hook if I want, or I can do 2 chain space. I can work into the chain space twice. I did a little test and I need to do a bit more work on this, but I think it actually is much neater if you work through the chain rather than the chain space, because it kind of keeps it on the horizontal. I think sometimes if you're doing 2 stitches into the chain space, it can create like a little bit of a peak in the 2 stitches can come together because there's nothing keeping them separate from each other. So although it's absolute pain in the backside, I would thoroughly recommend for any stitch where you're working into a chain to actually work into the chain rather than chain space if it's open-ended on which one you can choose. And my top tips for that would be 1, when you're making the chains that you know you're going to be working into, just leave your tension off a little bit. It will make it much easier to get your hook through it when you come to work through those chains on the next round or row. And the other thing that is really helpful is a pointier. The pointier the crochet hook, the better, because you're not trying to get something smooth and rounded through what is essentially the front and back loop of a chain, which is quite a small space to begin with. And so a pointy hook and much looser tension for those chains are about all you need to make your filet really pop out and make it a lot more manageable to make and a lot more enjoyable to crochet as well. So Omni is nearly finished. This will be finished off tonight, and then I am going to block it, which is another thing that I wanted to tell you about. I will pop a picture in because I forgot to get it from the house. No, I'll go and get it from the house. So when I come to block this, up until last week, I would have wet blocked absolutely everything apart from maybe cotton, but everything else I would have done a full submerge, soak, wet block, wring it out, pin it out. What's changed is I got myself a hand steamer, a clothes steamer. The one that I got is the Tefal Access Steam Plus, and I will show you the difference it's made to a shawl I finished. I'll show you in Off My Needles. I'm not sure I will ever properly wet block anything ever again. These retail for somewhere between £70 and £90. I got mine from Vinted because secondhand always rules for me, and I got it for £20 because I wanted to prove a point. And if I can get it for 20, why am I going to spend 90? So it's got this fabric bit on it, which means I can put it really up close, if not onto the thing that I am wet blocking. So the way that I've been doing it is to pin it out to the shape that I think that I want it, which means I can be quite accurate with that. and then I can simply steam block it, and the results are really good, and it's much quicker. So unless I'm working with yarn that's really like filthy and I've dropped on the floor, or the cat's been sick on it or something, these things happen, then I honestly don't think I'm ever going to wet block again. I will just continue to steam block because it is so much quicker to dry. Everything about it is quicker. It's a lot less faff as well. So yeah, I will feedback on how this goes with the wet blocking as well and let you know. Right, let me just pop this away. Oh, and another I'm full of all the top tips today. Can I talk to you quickly about yarn bowls? I use these. I pick them up in charity shops. I know you can get really big clay pottery yarn bowls. I used to sell some in the shop, but actually a couple of years ago I picked this up in a charity shop for £1. It's just something somebody turned, and it perfectly fits 100 grams of yarn, and it's really lightweight, and I will keep on buying them every time I find them in a charity shop because they fit inside my project bag. So anytime I go out to a cafe or I go to the craft group that I run, I take one of these little yarn bowls with me, and then I don't have balls of yarn running all over the place on the table and on the floor. So if you're in need of a yarn bowl, you don't need to spend loads and loads of money. Actually, just have a look. There are loads on Vinted as well, but just have a look for a little bowl that is wooden because they're extremely light. This is probably maybe 12 centimetres in diameter and maybe only about 6 or 7 centimetres in height, but it perfectly holds my yarn in there, and it's light, and it was really cost efficient way of getting extra yarn bowls. I'm always on the hunt for more of these in charity shops. I think I paid the heady price of £3 for this one. So you don't have to spend a lot, and I actually think you can get something that is more effective and that you can travel with. So have a look for a nice little hand-turned yarn bowls. Right, coming back to what else is on my hooks, I'm just going to show you these quickly because I have now managed to work up 3 of my blanket panels for the fall into winter blanket for my best friend's eldest boy. So from last time round, what I've changed is I think I was looking at maybe buying some more of the light grey yarn, and then I just thought, well, that's really silly because I know I've got enough of this dark grey and I don't have to do light, dark. I can just do light, dark is my blanket. I can do what I want. So I didn't buy any more yarn. Go me for once. And I know I've got enough of the light to do my 4th panel. And I definitely have enough of the dark to do my 4th panel and maybe introduce it into some of the border rounds as well to use that up, because by the end of it I would like to have no or as little as possible of this black and dark grey yarn left. So I have 3 panels done, 1 more to go, and I'm actually thinking that for the video tutorial that I'm going to pull together for this blanket, I might use a slightly different colour and just make up a little mini blanket, because I think that will be easier to get across on YouTube in terms of being able to see where I'm putting the hook into the stitch, but also I think it will make it a lot more obvious when I come to do like the joining and the rounds, because I can show what a full round is or what a full join is rather than trying to show it on the larger scale of a blanket. So I'm trying to think in practical terms of how I can show off the making of this blanket but make it really obvious for a video. So I will keep on going with this, but thank you everybody for your suggestions on how to work with dark yarn or black yarn. One of the suggestions was just don't, which I loved, and lots of other people gave me other suggestions for how you can, which I also loved, so thank you for that. That blog post is in the making at the moment, but I would want it to launch when I launch this scrappy version of the blanket as well. But also to say that Fall into Winter blanket is free on my blog post, And I've also just updated it, so if you wanted to do the paid for pattern, it is now in US and UK terminology. And I've also done that for the One Way or Another necktie, my Stormy Rainbow blanket, and Crochet by Numbers blanket as well. That's one of the pieces of work I'm doing this year, is trying to make sure that all of my crochet patterns are in UK and US terminology. So if you buy the pattern, you actually get to download both, and you can choose which one you work from, but you've got the option there. So that is everything that is on my needles, a shawl and a blanket, because as we all know, blankets don't count as a whip, and you can have something else on the go when you've got a blanket on the go when you're a monogamous crafter. Blankets don't count, not now, not ever. So looking at what is on my off my needles, I'm trying to be good and to get it right this time, because I'm always saying hooks when I mean needles and needles when I mean hooks, and I'm trying to be a little more diligent. I finished the shawl for my mum. This is the Weatherhouse Shawl. I love this. Given that I don't really do bright colours, and I'm not sure I should do bright colours like this, but I really enjoyed making this shawl. I said last time round that I could pretty much go straight into making another one. I'm not, but I'll show you what it is that I am going to make, which isn't dissimilar, but I've got plans for it. So this was really fun to knit. I used up most of my yarn, and I didn't add the tassels on, which means that I have got yarn left over. But because the border is a garter stitch, I needed a really nice bind off for that garter stitch, and a standard bind off would be too unelastic, would not be elasticated enough. So I needed something that was stretchy but that wouldn't flute. So basically the bind off that I did is you knit two, and then you place your left hand needle through the back loops of the two on your right hand needle and knit them together, knit another one, and then repeat. Left hand needle through the two back loops and knit that together. And what that means, let me show you, is you get the most beautiful cast off edge. Can you see that? It sits like a front and a back loop of crochet, but it sits right at a really nice stitch height as your bind off, and it sits like an edge. It's so beautiful, and it really has finished off the shawl to a very nice manner. I will pop a link down below to the person that I followed for on YouTube for the tutorial. Eventually I'll do my own tutorial on it because it's so simple, but I just really like how sturdy but finessed it looks on the edge of the shawl. It's a very nice finish, and it's got enough stretch in it without it being too much. Now what I would suggest is, if you need a stretchy bind off but you don't want it to be too stretchy, the other thing that I could have done was to have done my final row coming down 0.5mm of needle size, and then I could have done my stretchy bind off, and that would have kept it in but also given it a bit of stretch. But I didn't. I just used the same size for this one, but I kept my tension quite tight as I was binding off, because I've used this bind off before where I've been a little bit too loosey-goosey and it's created a very fluted effect. I will pop some photos up of what the shawl looked like before I blocked it, and then as it was blocking after I pinned it out, after I had pinned it out and then steamed it, and then this is the final effect. It's holding its shape really well with a steam block. I'm converted. I'm so converted. I love a shortcut that gives me the same results with a lot less hassle, and I will always take it. So this can go away. Sometimes I think my mum watches this podcast. Mother, if you're watching, you can just forget that this is coming to you for Christmas, and then it'll arrive for you for Christmas, and you can forget the next thing I'm going to say as well. But I did just mention the C word. I'm never this organised for Christmas, and I don't usually make this many things for Christmas either. But it happens to be that 2026 is the year that I'm making all the things. So I'm definitely getting a jump on it, and I'm sorry for mentioning the C word. But yeah, tough luck. Also, another C word thing, film recommendation for you, if you don't hate swearing, is I Swear, which was up for Oscar nominations. It's a Scottish film, very harrowing, very funny, very Scottish, and it's about Tourette's syndrome, and I thoroughly recommend it if you don't hear swearing, but it's about Tourette's, so there's quite a lot of swearing in it. So yeah, go ahead and watch it if you think it's going to be your cup of tea. You won't regret it. Random sidebar into films. So that leaves me with the fact that I used up all of the yellow from that shawl, from the Weatherhouse Shawl by Susan Crawford, but I've got about 37 grams of yarn left over, and the colours are nice, but I think they need another little pop like the yellow offered in it. It just zings up a little bit. You can see the difference once you pop the yellow in there. So I went stash diving because I want to make a pair of trainer socks for my mum to go with the shawl. And I pulled out 3 different colours that I thought I might use. And already I have discounted the navy because it doesn't do anything. The green is all right, but I just don't think it's zingy enough. And so I think what I'm going to do is add the yellow in. It's not just quite as pastel as the other yellow, but it does just do a job to kind of lift the overall palette. So I'm going to add this one in and use it, I think, for cuffs, heels and toes, and maybe a couple of stripes in it as well. And that will hopefully use up most of this lot and most of this, and we'll have a pair of striped socks. And I'm getting rid of even more mini skeins in my stash, and I'm not adding more scraps into it. So a pair of scrappy socks will be coming onto my needles at some point in the near future, which will be another Christmas thing. So I may as well get on it early this year. So the thing that is going to be coming onto my needles next, now that I've finished that, is a cardigan pattern that I saw at a yarn show last October, and it was it had been knitted by an indie dyer, and they had dyed up kits specifically for this pattern. It's called the Twist Cardigan, and it's by Amber O'Brien, and the version that they had on the stand at the Staffordshire Wool Show was so beautiful that I kept on going back and looking at it, but the colours weren't really my cup of tea, but I loved the overall effect. And so I'm going to go stash diving to be able to recreate this cardigan, the Twist Cardigan, and I would like to have it done in time for going and working at the John Arbon Mill Open Weekend, which is the first weekend in June. So I need to find the yarn in my stash because I don't want to be rebuying more yarn if I can possibly help it. And it needs to be in John Arbon yarn, and it needs to be the right weight. So I need to go and do a bit of a stash dive, see what I've got, and see what I can make out of it. Mine is going to be a much more muted version of this cardigan, and if you have a look through Ravelry, I've put links in for Ravelry and for Etsy where you can buy the pattern. But if you end up looking through patterns and the projects on Ravelry, there are some really beautiful versions, some very bright ones that are gorgeous, and some more muted ones that I am more likely to make. So I need to find some colours that will really work and make sure I've got the right quantities. But I'm looking forward to getting my needles into that. But it's a lot of purling, and I have told you before that I really hate purling, and I wanted to do some work this year on how I can maybe find a different technique for getting pearls. And so what might be coming onto my needle first is some swatching, because this is Rowan Valley Tweed, which is a nice neppy, like big nep. Sometimes you get neppy yarn that just, you can't really see the neps, and by nep what I mean is, see these little blips, little cream bits in there? That's a nep. They're a different texture. Sometimes they're a different type of fibre that's in there, but that's what a nep is. And this version of the Rowan Valley Tweed that I've got is one base colour and then one nep colour. Matthew wants a jumper, and I think I've decided that he suits raglans better than yoked jumpers as well, and that I can get a better fit on him. So I need to do some swatching with this yarn, but I'm thinking while I do the swatching I could do multiple swatches and practice different types of purling, and then there's a blog post in that, so I can try my Portuguese purling, I can try knitting backwards, I'll even try continental purling again to see what that is. But if I can maybe try out 3 or 4 different types of purl, I can maybe settle on one that I know I prefer and that I can speed up on. Or the answer might just be that the purling that I do at the moment, which is standard English purling, is actually my fastest and the least hated version that I can do, so suck it up and get on with it. But I'd like to think that we've got Easter weekend coming up and that I might be able to get through 3 or 4 different swatches for his jumper and test out different purling techniques at the same time. So once I've done the swatches for his jumper, I can then not do his jumper and I can make myself a cardigan, and then I can work towards Matthew's jumper later in the year, having already settled out with the swatches what I can do and what jumper he wants. So there will be a twist cardigan coming, but it's like I've got to find the yarn and I've got to find which purl I like, and then I need to re-swatch with the yarn that I'm going to use for that cardigan to make sure that that works as well, because it's quite a loose fibre. It calls for fingering weight yarn, but it uses a 3.75mm needle, so it's quite an open gauge, which is one of the things I really liked about the cardigan. So quite a bit of work until I get to that point, really. I've just been sat here for a moment because I looked at how long I've been recording for, and it was under 30 minutes, but I feel like I've been yabbering on for like 50 minutes and rammed information in you, so apologies if it feels a little bit like that and maybe like I've been going 19 to the dozen. But I don't have any incoming yarn to share with you, so that's out the window. But what I can tell you about is that, do you remember Moorit Magazine? Let me get one. I'm back. Do you remember Moorit? Lovely Moorit Magazine, which stopped for a little while. Well, it's coming back, which is really good news to hear, because it was as good as it ever really got for crochet, in terms of a nice journal and a nice tabletop type of magazine that had beautiful patterns. There is Rosina's Gudrun shawl. So I'm really pleased that Moorit is coming back on the scenes. Alison is still very heavily involved in it, but actually this person here, this model, is called Hayley, and Hayley is coming on board with Moorit, and between the two of them they are relaunching the magazine. I am so pleased about it, because we don't get stuff like this for crochet. Crochet just is never usually at the same level as other crafts, and I always think it's a crying shame. So I'm so chuffed that Moorit is coming back, and whilst I said I wasn't going to do any more submissions this year, if you're interested and you're a budding designer or a long-term designer, Moorit are open for submissions at the moment. I think the submission call closes on the 19th of April, so not very long. You've got just about 3 weeks, just under, if you want to get your submission in. And I think Alison's been running some little stories on Instagram about how you can put your submission in and what the process is, and they've always been very good at supporting first-time designers or very fresh, very new designers. So if you're budding and you're really into it, then check out Moorit and their submission process. So I don't know exactly when the next issue is coming out. I think it will be issue 9, because I think they took the break at the end of issue 8. But I'm pretty sure it's issue 9 will be coming, I'm hoping, later in the year. I'm guessing that Hayley's going to be up there. Alison certainly is, because she's one of the organisers, but also has a Moorit stand at the Woolly Good Gathering in Edinburgh, which is not very far away. It's just over 2 weeks' time. So I'm hoping that I can have a little catch up with Alison and with Hayley at that gathering and just get some inside info for you, which I'll either pop in here, or I'll do a blog post, or I might take to Instagram, because I've kind of put myself back on Instagram again. I had a year out of it because I was deeply unhappy about social media, and what I've come to recognise is it's really hard to run a business if you don't tell people what you're up to, and Instagram is an integral part of that. So I am back on Instagram, and I am at FayDH Designs. So keep a little lookout, because one, I'm going to be at the Woolly Good Gathering in Edinburgh, and that's the easiest place for me to share it, is there, and to put photos up in YouTube as posts. So yeah, hopefully I can get some inside information for you from Alison and from Hayley on what we can expect for the next iteration of Moorit. But really good news. It's not an easy industry at the moment, the print industry. It's tough times. So it's really special that this is coming back, and I'm excited for it. I think that truly is everything now. This might just be one of those shorter episodes, in which case I will see you back in 2 weeks' time. If you're off over the Easter period, then have an amazing time. If you don't mind, do me a favour and hit the like button or the subscribe button, or even better, leave me a comment and let me know what you are up to and what you are working on. I'd love to know what you're up to. Until 2 weeks' time, have an amazing fortnight. I am